Okay. Okay. Hi, my name is Kim Weeks. I'd like to welcome you back or welcome you to these Weeks Well events that we're doing in 2022 that are an outgrowth of the Yoga Lineages project that I started last year with Yoga Alliance. In this series, which is now in its second year, I'm talking with the world's main modern global lineage heads or longtime practitioners from all different corners of the practice to talk about what yoga lineage is and why it matters. And, I have to say that today, for so many reasons, is such a special day. First of all, happy International Yoga Day to everybody. Secondly, I know. Secondly, happy solstice for those of us who practice. Yeah. And then happy birthday to Stephen Cope.
Thank you.
And so I'm here to have this session go on with you all on the, what yoga lineage is and why it matters from the point of view of two practitioners who have a long history together. And with Satbir and me, I have history with. I've certainly been talking to Stephen for over a year now about this project. And so I'm so, Stephen, delighted to welcome you and for us to be together in this Sangha, in this conversation, and in the exploration of, at a time when, as we discussed, Stephen and Satbir in our pre-call, there's been such a kind of a mainstreaming of yoga. What happens to lineage? What happens to the threads of lineage in that context? So most of you know or know of Bir Singh Khalsa, who's now an associate professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School. And as I read in your book, Stephen, you said it well. I think you said he's the heart and the soul or the main driver behind yoga research in the world. And I'm always seeking for ways to say it, but it's totally true. So without any further ado as well, welcome Stephen Cope, who's here and multiple times published author and a Kripalu yoga teacher. And I'm sure you two will talk about how you met and the work you did together, which you can learn about in part by reading Stephen's recent book, The Dharma of Difficult Times, in Difficult Times, right? Yeah, I'm even curious about that preposition, like of or in. Anyway, The Dharma in Difficult Times, it is such a good book, and Stephen outdoes himself even here. But you can read about the work that they did together, some research that they intersected in, which is one of the things we'll talk about today. Yeah. So quick housekeeping before I hand it over to Stephen by asking my first questions. First of all, this is a 75-minute call, and we kind of riff in these conversations. Stephen and Satbir, as we all three of us have discussed, and as many of you logging in have learned, we could be here all day talking about this topic. And if you do have questions, please feel free to go to the Q&A, which is for you. You can upvote questions if you see them, ones that you like. And the chat function is from us to you, where we'll share links, for example, Stephen's book, Satbir's book. I mean, we've got, you've got some heavy hitters on this call, which is why I'm so honored to be a part of it. So keep looking for the chat for information on us and on Stephen and Satbir. And right as we get started, I'm going to ask just two questions that'll pop up on your screen. First, I think our first question is, are you a yoga teacher? We're curious. You all will probably laugh, Stephen and Satbir. We asked last time, are you a yoga teacher, a yoga practitioner, or both? And Lois Steinberg, in all of her very, sort of succinct wisdom, was like, how can you be a yoga teacher without being a yoga practitioner? So we thought that's true. So the second question is, how did you hear about this event from us? Did you hear about it from, Stephen's or Satbir's newsletters or outreach, or did you hear about it some other way, social media or some other way? So as you're answering the question, we will then get started. There are so many things to talk about, Stephen and Satbir, and we decided to start at the very top, which is the pros and cons of lineage. And you all met at Kripalu, is that right?
We did. I mean, my memory of this goes back many decades now, I'm so happy to say, but my memory is that we had met briefly at Kripalu, but we met in depth at the dinner that was the launch for the Harvard Institute of Oriental Medicine. And we were both there as guests, and somehow, I don't know if we were at the same table, but I just remember, Sapir, that we ended up in a corner talking about what we needed to do in order to really birth yoga into the mainstream. And we decided at that wonderful event, cloistered away in a corner, that in order to mainstream yoga, we really had to have the science. We had to really understand the mechanisms and effects and dosing and all of the things that Sapir has dedicated his life to, in order to bring it into mainstream institutions, schools, universities, medical centers. Well, that was, I believe, in 2006, and we pretty much hit the ground running by enrolling the Boston Symphony Orchestra, a major mainstream institution, in the idea of bringing us into their summer program for great young musicians around the world, and studying the effects of curriculum of yoga and meditation on performance. Because I'm a classical pianist, and I have no doubt that when I'm practicing meditation and yoga deeply, it transforms my musicianship, my practice, my consciousness of the music. We had, at Kripalu, we had two big old grand pianos down in the basement. So when I arrived there, I started noticing that with my deeper practice, my concentration was heightened, my memory was heightened, my capacity to do what's called sight reading, that is to just read from a very complex script. And so I got really interested in that. I knew that wasn't just me. And so Tanglewood, the great summer home of the Boston Symphony Orchestra, is right across the street from Kripalu. And we found that because we approached them with the idea of doing research, they, even though I think 20 years ago it was still considered a little bit marginal, they invited us in, and we had 3 wonderful summers. Sapir and I were on the faculty of Tanglewood Institute, and did some great research and had some great experiences with these exceptional young kids. Sapir, what do you remember about our first meeting?
Well, it was 2005.
Okay.
It was a new Harvard program in Asian medicine, started by Ted Kapchuk, who is well known for his research in placebo effects and acupuncture. And so, yeah, that was an opening event, and we hit it off right away with a lot of conversation at that event, and then immediately followed up with that. And it was Kavi's inspiration and initiative to take this in the direction of yoga for musicians. And the one thing we found pretty quickly in the research was it's pretty difficult to measure creativity and performance characteristics. That's difficult to measure, but the one thing we found right away, and one thing that was very important and critical actually for musicians, was music performance anxiety. And so that ended up being the primary outcome for the research that we did over the next 5 years or so. And it went beyond Tanglewood. We ended up in Boston as well, at the Boston Conservatory, doing a study there. And we were writing grant applications, and we published a number of papers really showing fairly nicely that music performance anxiety was reduced in these young adult musicians. We also did studies with the Tanglewood program with adolescent musicians, and that also revealed positive results. And the problem for musicians is that where do they go if they have anxiety? I mean, you can't start taking mind-altering drugs like benzodiazepines, because that's going to, I mean, these are brain drugs. And music performance is a very subtle, central nervous system function. You have to be very tuned in, very subtle, and drugs are, they end up with side effects and so on. So anxiety drugs are not really an option for musicians. Furthermore, this is absolutely a critical issue for musicians. If you want to become a musician, if you can't manage your music performance anxiety, you cannot have a career. So this is really absolutely critical for them. And so what we ended up looking at was something that was very important, and published a few studies that really showed that efficacy.